Welcome to What We Really Want, Conversations about Connection, brought to you by Awaken. We're a gospel-based 12-step recovery community, and we're dedicated to helping people live the lives they were created for. So settle in and get ready for a great conversation. Let's talk about what we really want.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of What We Really Want. This is Greg and Stacey with you this morning.
I am really excited about this episode.
Tell me why.
Well, we have Jill Gullahorn joining us, and she has become a friend. I don't really even remember exactly when we met, but
I think it's been about 8 years.
8 years, wow.
If you recognize the name Gullahorn, Jill's husband, Andy, was on episode 3 along with Gabe Scott. So Jill and Andy are married.
Yes, and she has become a therapist since we first met her, and I wouldn't say I have spent very much time with her, but the little bit of time that we have gotten to spend together is always very rich.
There's some people that you don't have to spend a lot of time with to feel like you've known them for a long time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Jill and Andy are people who just really make you feel seen and heard and important.
One thing I think about is kind of funny. I have become known for saying many things. Some things that people would say, I can't believe you just said that. And something I think about when I'm with Jill is she's so kind and she's so sweet. And I think, I should be more like her. But she's just, people are seen and heard when they're in Jill and Andy's presence. So I think that's a good thing. Good way to say it.
And people who follow music will know Jill more likely as Jill Phillips, because that's been her performing name. She and Andy are singer-songwriters. And so if you're familiar with Jill Phillips, one of the things that we're going to get into in the conversation is how it came to be that she decided that the next kind of phase of her life, she wanted to become a therapist, which is really cool. And we get into a point where we get into this concept of doing our own work, which is super, super important. You and I, just in the car before we sat down to record this, were sort of talking about this, particularly the topic for women who are coming into Awaken's community having been sexually betrayed by their partners. You have to really tread lightly on this conversation of encouraging them to do their own work.
Right.
Talk about that a little bit.
We actually, just this past Tuesday at our recovery group, we talked about having patience in the process. We find out that our husbands are sex addicts or have betrayed us in some way sexually. And we think, we'll go to a few counseling sessions. Maybe we'll go to this weird group, whatever, a few times, and then we'll be done. And it just, to a person, everybody in there that keeps coming says, that's just not how it works. I'm realizing, because a lot of women feel like initially they're sad and really mad, and then they really get feel like they have progress and they're forgiving their spouse and they think, okay, this is going to work. But then they have a bad day and they think that all of that's gone. And that's just not how it works. One girl said this past week that she came into the group because of her husband being an addict, but she has stayed for herself. So I came for my husband, but I stayed for myself. And I think that was really, really cool to hear.
I think that anybody who has come into a place of support and the catalyst was somebody else hurt me, like somebody else's choices and actions and behavior is the main reason why I'm here. Right. It can be really tricky, and it can take a while to come to the point of the light bulb going off that I have things that I want to work on for me.
Right.
And I know that whether it is in a addiction support recovery group or a grief support or a betrayal trauma support group, we can fail to realize the extent of our own unhealthiness because it's just been normal until we start hanging around with people who are doing their work.
Exactly. And it's tricky to not equal doing my work or realizing that I have unhealthy habits, whatever you want to call them, does not equal I am to blame and I'm part of this addiction that my husband's been
absolutely
part
not.
of. So that's where a lot of women, I think, get hung up. I know I did. I was like, I don't need to do anything. Greg just needs to fix himself and then we'll be fine.
And part of doing your work from betrayal trauma is getting healthy enough to say, this wasn't my fault.
Exactly.
And also to be able to say, I'm sure that there are negative contributions I made to the relationship that I can own for my improvement, my health, but that's separate from taking responsibility for what somebody else did with it.
Exactly. And you don't do that early on. Part of getting help and doing your work is actually walking through that trauma and honoring the pain and just acknowledging just how bad it is. I think that's a huge piece of it.
Yeah. And so having a community where you're hanging around people who are doing the work, going to see a therapist who has done their own work.
Yes.
And they're not just speaking in the theoretical or the hypothetical, but they're speaking out of the deep places that they've been to in holding space with you and supporting you is great. And that's one thing that we really have seen a lot of in Jill. I mean, she's the real deal. She does her own work.
She does her work. Yeah. I think doing your work, no matter what you do, is important. Because I think no matter what your profession is, you doing your work is going to benefit all around.
Well, we think you're going to really enjoy getting to know Jill through this conversation that we had a little while back at her dining room table.
That's right.
In Nashville.
That's right.
And so just enjoy and remember, if anything that you ever hear in these conversations stirs up a desire to reach out, find out what some resources are for you getting your own help and support and whatever it is that you're walking through, we would love for you to reach out to us. We'll have in the show notes ways that you can find out more about Jill, ways that you can find out more about Awaken, and reach out and contact us. So thanks for listening and enjoy this conversation with Jill Gullahorn.
Is this being recorded right now?
Yeah. So
okay. You started it already.
I did.
That's, dear
yes.
Lord.
When I was talking to Andy and Gabe and I asked them what they really wanted, Gabe said he wanted a tickle fight.
I'm very ticklish and it's like torture to me.
Yes.
Yeah, I hate it too.
So Jill Gullahorn, welcome to What We Really Want.
Thank you, Greg.
We're here. Stacey and Jill and I are going to have a conversation, and we're going to start the way that we typically do, which is with that question. What do you really want out of this conversation we're about to have?
Well, I love being with my friends, Greg and Stacey. So that's a win. But I think somewhere deep down, whenever I agree to do an interview or a podcast, I want us all, including the listener, to feel like they're less alone. That we're kind of all on the same team.
Man.
Yeah.
Some of the people listening already know you. Some of them know you as Jill Gullahorn. Some of them know you as Jill Phillips.
Yeah.
And it's not because you're confused about your identity.
And most of them have no idea who I am. And that's totally fine.
But they will after this. Yeah, just tell us a little bit about you, where you're from, where you are now, your family, just anything you want to share starting out.
Well, I'm a wife and a mom of 3 amazing kids, adults and teenagers. I'm from Virginia originally and landed here in Nashville, where I've lived since 1994.
30 years.
30. I've actually never thought about that. 30 years, yeah. Came here to attend Belmont University, which is where I met my husband, Andy. And we've just stayed. And this has been home ever since. Kids are 22, 19, and 16. We've got one about to graduate college. We've got one a sophomore in college, and then one that's a junior in high school.
I think we've known you guys probably since about 2016, and it's weird thinking of Ty, your youngest, being at that point in high school because he was just a little guy.
Like looking at colleges. I know, it's crazy.
Okay, so I kind of hinted at some people know you as Jill Phillips, some people know you as Jill Gullahorn. Why is that? That might seem like a silly question, but I think you know what I mean by that.
I do. It's to be really difficult. So Phillips is my maiden name, and when I started as an artist on Word Records, I started communication with them before I was married, and so as an artist, I was signed as a musician under the name Jill Phillips. So most people that know me through music know me as Jill Phillips. And then people who know us personally or know me through the work I do as a therapist know me as Jill Gullahorn.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was like a Mellencamp kind of thing, because he started out as John Cougar because it was easier to remember. So.
I think it was just easier to say once I got married to Andy, and we had already started the ball rolling as an artist as Phillips, and it just made sense. And it's actually really a gift because I think then I know how people know me, which is just interesting,
Yeah. So like we mentioned, you've spent basically about 25 years, about a quarter of a century as a songwriter and as a musician. But then a few years ago, you made a pretty significant change and you went back to school and you got your counseling degree. Talk to me and us a little bit about like what went into that. How long did you think about it before you did it? Just kind of what was that season like?
That's a great question. Yeah, I was thinking I was 39. So it was about 8 years ago. And I think I had always been intrigued by the work therapists do. Andy and I found that a lot of therapists showed up at our shows over the years, and they were interested in what we were doing, and we were interested in what they were doing.
That makes so much sense.
I remember doing a benefit concert for Barnabas Center in Charlotte, North Carolina, and talking to some of the therapists there, and I just wanted to know all about what they did. And they wanted to know how music could be used in what they were doing. So I think there were seeds all along of just like, this intrigues me. But I never thought I would go back and do that myself. I just thought I have a real appreciation for this. And I think through a series of circumstances in my own life, some of which was a season of great transition where I got some really amazing therapy from an incredible therapist, I thought, wow, this has the power to really facilitate transformation. Not that she is doing the transformation, but just like a guide in that process. So I just really believe in the power of it. And I was so moved by it and changed by it that I remember being on a hike with my friend Courtney, who is also now a therapist. And Courtney's mother's a therapist. So I know she had thought about it on and off for years, but we never really talked about it. And I just said, Courtney, I think I want to go back to school. And she said, oh, I've never told anybody, but I want to go back to school too. And we both had 3 kids, and that began the plan of like, let's do this together. So it was probably a year before maybe half a year to a year before we were actually enrolled. But it was on that hike that I said it out loud.
How long between that hike and when you started actually moving towards making it happen?
I'm trying to remember. That's such a good question. It might have been, it was probably in the 6 month to a year, maybe even 6 months now that I think about it. Because I think once we were thinking about it together and I knew I would have a buddy with me, I was just like, oh man. So we would like spur each other on, and we took all of our classes. Yeah, we took all of our classes together and all of that.
Wow.
Well, I was going to ask about that because I was wondering if once you had said it out loud, was there ever any second guessing or maybe this isn't a good idea? Or once you were kind of in it with Courtney, was there no looking back?
I don't know. Maybe you know those moments in your own life where you just know that you know that you know. And I'm typically a second guesser. Like I typically need affirmation. And I'm sure Andy affirmed me a lot in that time and other people, but I just think I knew that I was supposed to do it. I even had pushback in my life from somebody that I love and care about. They're like, what are you doing? It's going to ruin your life. And I just remember thinking, I don't think it is. I don't think this is.
Even if you went through that and didn't end up being a therapist, I don't think it would ruin your life.
Yeah.
I could enhance it even just doing the school part.
Yeah. I think there was a lot of unknown in how it would interplay with my other career. And there was a lot of unknown in me, but I think I knew enough to know I'm comfortable with this unknown. I even remember when I went to sign up for classes, a professor was there that I was going to have in classes, but I knew her outside of that. I had known her actually as just a human being in life. And her husband was there, and he said, what are you going to do about music? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know. Let's see.
Yeah.
And it's worked out just fine.
So this question just came to me. If for whatever reason it became clear to you that it wasn't feasible to do both,
Yeah.
what would you choose now?
Oh,
That's not an easy question.
It's a great question. I feel so grateful to God that He knows me so well and my love of variety that I have never felt like I had to make that choice.
Right.
But I think if I had to make that choice, what it would look like is continuing as a therapist professionally and then doing music for fun in any way I possibly could.
Yeah.
You know, singing at church or
Yeah.
singing with Andy or whatever. Yeah.
Well, you talked about your therapist, and I think some of the words I remember you using were someone who really helped to facilitate the transformation and the change, and somebody who she wasn't doing that, but she was serving as a guide.
Yes.
So what do you remember noticing as you were the client that maybe you wouldn't have experienced had there not been that trained and compassionate guide in the room with you?
Yeah.
Like what did she help you to get in touch with, even if she wasn't the one that was kind of creating it?
I mean, I think for me, if I had to sum it up, was someone who wasn't afraid of what I was dealing with. They had been there before. They had sat in hard things before, and who really offered hope. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Is like, I think most people that I sit with are coming in with some version of, am I crazy?
Yeah.
Or is there something uniquely terrible or wrong about me? And am I unredeemable, irredeemable, whatever that word is? And it can be so comforting to just hear a voice say, no, you're just like millions of other people who have struggled with the same thing, whether that's addiction or trauma or you name it. Like, to have that authority there, who not only can say, I've seen what you're talking about, I've experienced what you're talking about, but I've also seen there be hope. My therapist at the end of the first session just said, I don't know where your journey is going to take you, but I know there's hope for flourishing. And like, that's all I needed to hear. So it was like variations of that. And so that's what I try to offer my
That's
clients.
really strong too, because I would imagine if you're like me at all, you might have gone in there wanting to have a charted course of how you were going to get to and how long it's going to take to find that hope. But just to have someone with calmness and confidence say, you're going to find it.
Yep. Yeah. And bringing and really helping them. I mean, that's what I try to do with my clients, is helping them connect to their inner wisdom and God in them. And then I reflect what I see and I hear and all of that, but I'm not charting that course for them. I've seen clients do the most amazing, remarkable things that I could not have scripted in my wildest imagination when they first came in. But they always say, you know, in therapy, trust the process, trust the process.
Okay,
It's a phrase I kind of hate to hear because
Yeah.
I've been in therapy a long time.
Well,
and sometimes I get tired of it.
I was going to
get
ask
it.
you, Hun, like the things that Jill's been talking about the last couple of minutes. I mean, I can't imagine a lot of that doesn't sound very familiar.
Oh, yeah.
Even though you're relating to people in a little bit of a different context.
Well, yeah, I was thinking about myself, the way I grew up. Therapy was not a good thing. You don't need therapy. You know, just need the Bible. And nobody said that directly, but that's just basically never talking about therapy or going to a counselor for help. I got that message.
Yeah.
And so when our story lives blew up and we got into therapy, I remember the first day, our therapist just saying, kind of explaining how one gets to this point, more like from the addiction side, I think. But even that made me feel, because I felt like we were the weirdest people
Sure.
to be dealing with this addiction. And I didn't realize that I was in trauma and didn't know I had problems too. I wouldn't have said I was perfect, but I wouldn't have realized the depth of my issues.
Would it be fair to say that you didn't think that you were in the room for your stuff? You were in there to sit with me with my stuff.
We were there to fix Greg.
Yeah.
Let's get him fixed and get back to life. But yeah, her just telling us kind of how a person gets to this place. And a lot of statistics, honestly, of people, because we were, you know, he was on staff at a church and that was just like, this doesn't happen to people on staff. Although I knew that it did.
Yeah.
But those were just like extreme cases and we're just normal people. So anyway, her explaining a lot of things that were really just factual
Yep.
made me feel like, oh, maybe we can do this.
Yeah.
So, and I think I felt like I couldn't divorce because, again, the way I was raised, and I didn't want to, but just kind of her reassuring just whatever the path looked like was okay. Mm-hmm. So it was tough. It was hard. I didn't want to be there. And yet that was the first glimmer of hope that I had for us when we met her.
Yeah. I mean,
And now I'm still in therapy and we're not dealing with the same things.
Right. But the power
we need
of somebody else in the room who just isn't freaked out or overwhelmed by the stuff. It's just like, yeah, sure. It's so, the therapist being underwhelmed is almost overwhelming.
Yes.
When you consider what you're bringing in and the shame that often accompanies it.
Yes.
Like you're just expecting somebody to reflect the disgust or the shock. And when they don't, it's a little bit like disconcerting.
Yes.
In a good way, though. I think eventually.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I wanted to talk about with you is an area in which I know you've done a lot of training and a lot of work, and you have a lot of wisdom and knowledge and understanding. So we'll talk about the Enneagram in just a few minutes. But with the types of people that Stacey and I are rubbing shoulders with, it's most of the time it is men who have unwanted sexual behavior, that habitual or addictive, and they're seeking recovery from that. Women who are their partners, so they're coming in with sexual betrayal trauma. We also offer help for women who are struggling themselves. And so I know just from knowing you for a while that you are very comfortable working with women who are experiencing betrayal trauma.
Yes.
How much, I mean, I know that's not the only thing you do. Is that a significant part of your practice or just kind of one of many types of issues that you work with?
It's a great question. I would say it fluctuates, but I would imagine it's always about at least a quarter of my practice, quarter to a third. And I think partly it's because, word gets around. If you're a safe person to sit with something like that, there are a lot of therapists in town that do not feel comfortable working with addiction and betrayal trauma. And so thankfully there are more and more of us all the time, but
there kind of have to be.
There really should be. But I do appreciate people who are like, that's not my wheelhouse. In the same way, if someone came to me with disordered eating, I would find them a specialist,
Yes.
So I just feel, I feel so hopeful for these women and helping them find their voice and reconnect to themselves and their heart and their needs and all of that. And it is really amazingly rewarding work.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to jump off of something, Hun, that you said a minute ago about when we first started therapy, and you're like not even realizing that you had your own issues, right?
I never would have said I was perfect.
No. And that's not what I thought you said.
But not like really big problems.
Right. But that kind of, I think that transitions well into the next thing that I want to talk about, because in this podcast, what it's about, we're trying to just suggest and talk about and invite people to have a vision for what healthy connection could look like in their own lives. And what are some of the things that are required to move towards that? And one of them that I've kind of identified is healthier self-awareness, being connected to myself, what I've gone through, how that's affected me. And, it really shows up a lot in sexual brokenness and recovery, because with women, so many times there's a wide range of belief that's coming in there. Everything from this is all my fault. If I would have been more X or more Y or more Z or less A or B or C, then this wouldn't have happened. All the way over to, I don't know why you're talking about anything having to do with me. If we can just get him to keep it in his pants, we'll be fine. And everything in between. And so one of the things that I've noticed can really hinder progress and reconciliation, if that's what a couple wants, or just the healing that an individual wants, is not being aware or not being willing to deepen my self-awareness. And so coming to understand what I've been through and how it affected me and how that's shown up is not taking responsibility for anything that anybody else did, but it's just saying, are there contributions that I make in my relationships that could be healthier? Whether the other person changes or not, whether my marriage survives or not, are there things that I can just be more at peace and more joyful in whatever relationships I get to experience, that God brings into my life? And so there's a ton of different ways that people can pursue self-awareness, But one of the ones that I've just become more familiar with, and partially because of hanging out with you and Andy, is the Enneagram. So I was going to get you, because I know that you've done a lot of specific work with like Ian and Suzanne. And if people don't know who they are, you could tell us more about them. But just talk a little bit about the Enneagram for people who may not have ever heard of it, which probably won't be too many.
So the Enneagram is this ancient wisdom tool. Some people call it personality typing, but that's very America business. They used to call it like a wisdom tool, but it's been around for a really long time in a lot of different religions.
Like hundreds of years, right?
Yes, and they have records of it with in Judaism and Christianity and Sufis, and it goes way, way back. But it is a basically the teaching about the Enneagram is that it's 9 distinct different ways of seeing and being in the world, and lenses through which you sort of interpret life and engage with life and see yourself and see others. I always lead by saying there are lots of amazing self-aware people that never knew the Enneagram, and you're going to be just fine. If you're not interested, it's totally fine. But for people that do use it, they usually find it really helpful, especially in companioning it with other things, maybe recovery work or trauma work or attachment work or whatever. It really overlays nicely with all of and spiritual formation. So kind of understanding your unique way of seeing and being in the world, your unique pitfalls, your unique giftings, I think is really helpful for people.
A way that I would feel like it would be is, it seems to me like that would really be a contrasting voice against shame that a lot of people carry because of the way that they perceive themselves.
Yes.
Like, this is how I interact with the world, and I should be different.
Yes.
Right. And so coming to understand that it's not that you should be this number and this number is bad. It's just understanding, and that's going to influence and seeing it as acceptance and blessing it and being at peace with it, rather than finding a way to make it to where I should be better or different.
Absolutely. And I think, as you know, shame looks like 2 different things. It looks like toxic shame or contempt. And so it can go either way. People can think their way of seeing and being is the only right way to see and be in the world, or they can think there's something uniquely wrong or worse about theirs. And so I think it kind of brings the balance both ways.
Kind of judging others or judging self.
Exactly. Yeah. So for people that are judging others, it can help them understand, hey, there are 8 other ways, and a myriad within that, as unique as each person is in the world, ways of engaging with the world. And mine is no better or worse than anyone else's. In fact, it's my belief that these are all facets of the character of God. And like without them, we're not seeing a full picture of his character and how he's wired us to be in the world. So we really need all of them.
So people who are hearing this and are really interested and don't know a lot about it, I know that there are an awful lot of resources that have come out probably in the last, 10 or 20 years.
Yeah.
Is there a go-to starter for people to look into it as far as a book or a resource, just to kind of understand a little bit more in depth what you're talking about?
Well, Suzanne Stabile was my teacher. I did an Enneagram apprentice training program with her for 3 years. So I usually recommend her podcast, which is the Enneagram Journey, because I think sometimes people hear themselves through story and interviewing somebody of the similar number versus a book. I mean, I'm a big fan of books too, but I think when you read, it's like, well, I could be this, I could be this, I have some of these characteristics. But when you're hearing someone talk about their experience being that number, I think more people relate to that. So she's got a wonderful podcast called The Enneagram Journey. Ian has a podcast called Typology.
And this is Ian Cron.
Ian Cron. And so I think podcasts are usually where I tell people to start. I mean, there are a million different books. The Road Back to You is one. A lot of starter books. Beatrice Chestnut has a lot of books that are great. Yeah, if you want to get more into it, then I think that's the way to go. You can go as deep or as surface as you want to with this stuff.
When you talk about the 9 distinct personality traits that it talks about, I know that when you study the Enneagram, you can realize that you're going to experience or manifest how you show up differently if you're coming more from a healthy, integrated place in your head and heart, or when you're maybe more under stress or disintegrated with the parts of your lives. And could you, I mean, without getting into like a master class or anything, tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, I feel like whether you know the Enneagram or not, people that are listening, you can relate to this, how some of your best qualities can also be your worst qualities. Mm-hmm. And it's how they're stewarded and what the motivation is. Take somebody who's really driven and gifted and visionary. That can be an incredible gift, and it can also become a human doing instead of someone who is connected with their heart. So the Enneagram just really talks about sort of the gift and the shadow side of your personality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when people are struggling with addictions or showing up really unhealthy in relationships, and subsequently they have ended up searching for what they want in some sideways or broken ways.
Totally.
How can coming to understand, if a part of their therapy, a part of their study moving forward involves the Enneagram, how could you see that helping them look at what they've been doing through a different filter that could be helpful in walking into a different future?
I mean, I think the way I would describe the Enneagram being useful to somebody in recovery or doing trauma work or whatever it is it just turns in the microscope a little bit. It might help you ask some more specific and directive questions. It might help you get to the root of things a little more quickly. I think you can still get there with trauma therapy and recovery work and all of that. I mean, true things are just true. These are just different doors to take you there, I think. So I feel like the Enneagram, I feel like what it can do, which we've been talking about this entire podcast, is really depersonalize some behavior patterns of yours and people you love, which is an antidote to shame. If it's like Andy and I, who, have done work around the Enneagram, he can say to me, he can know that I might be doing a 6-ish kind of thing. And he's not like, what the heck is wrong with you? Why are you doing this? He might be able to just have compassion and ask me some better questions. And so it helps us take things less personally. And I think it gives us a lot more compassion. And if it's not used for that, I say, chuck it. Don't use it. It shouldn't be reductionary. It shouldn't be limiting. It should be expanding. It should go, hey, you're more than just this. And compassion for ourselves and for others. 100%. And when I teach it, I always start with that, because I think a lot of people who have had a bad experience with the Enneagram have experienced that as a way to be reduced or shamed, like, oh, what a 4 thing to do or whatever. And then, and Brene Brown has done all this research around the 12 categories of shame. And one of them is being stereotyped or labeled. And so the Enneagram is really fraught with that tension of like, if it's used to stereotype or label, it can really do harm. Right. If you walk around saying, I'm a 6 or I'm a 9 or I'm a 2, or to use another one, I'm an ENFJ. Yeah. If it's Myers-Briggs or, I'm a type A or whatever. I remember the melancholy, phlegmatic, sanguine. Yeah. Totally. Choleric. The melancholy were the depressed people. The choleric were kind of the blunt, almost cruel. I mean, phlegmatic, anything goes, sanguine, outgoing. So pegged. Like there's so much more to those. I know. I think it's like something to use as like a jumping off place and another tool in the tool belt. And it's really deep. But unfortunately, all of them tend to sometimes be used as weapons. Yes. Like as ways of saying, oh, that's why you're the way that you are. Totally. Anything about our character or our personality, which is so vulnerable and tender to us, because really the Enneagram exposes things. I mean, I remember the first time I heard a 6 taught, I just thought, oh my gosh, I just want to curl up and like drop down in this floor because I just felt so exposed and it sounded the worst of any of the numbers. And when Suzanne teaches, she goes, most people when they hear their number think this is the worst one. Except for 8s, they're fine with their number. But I felt really exposed. And so when you're dealing with someone's heart and their motivations and stuff like that, you have to do it with a lot of tenderness and compassion instead of, I see this thing about you and it's exposed now and we all see it and we're going to like shame you about it. Wow. So speaking of compassion, this is something that comes up a lot with the people in our community. Now, we've got a lot of single people in our community, but a lot of married people too. And obviously, a path towards recovery from sexual addiction
has a lot of the same things in it, whether you're single or married, but there are a lot of practical implications that are different. And so for the people in our community who are married, something that comes up a lot among the men who are, quote unquote, the perpetrators, or the offending parties, is that they want to receive compassion from their spouse.
Yeah.
And golly, that's a tall order.
Yeah.
Right? Because, you're asking for the person that you've just emotionally and relationally viciously attacked to feel bad for you, because now I feel bad for what I did. And in a sense, I totally get it, because at my worst in my addiction, it wasn't because I didn't love my wife, which is a weird thing for people to try to fit their heads around.
Yeah.
It was all of my other broken and unprocessed stuff that I didn't know what to do with. And so the way that I tried to deal with it was in the most hurtful way possible for her. And that was just really unfortunate.
Yes.
And so, to have expected her to be my biggest cheerleader when I got into recovery would have been really unrealistic.
Yeah.
But that's hard. I mean, it's hard for these guys. And so some of the women are like, he's like communicating that I should be proud of him for doing this and going to that meeting and going to therapy, So when you're working with someone who is in the seat of the one who's been betrayed, I know you've got to walk very carefully in places like that. Sure. But if you feel like you're seeing resentment that's actually harming her, what are some of the invitations that you try to work your way towards?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and probably deserves like an hour-long answer. But I'm going to give you the short version, at least from my experience and perspective. There are people that have been doing this and are experts in this. But, I think trauma research and what we're learning around trauma is informing so much. I know it has for you guys about how we work with things like betrayal. People did not used to understand that this was trauma. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of people that I've sat with that are like, forgive and forget, get over it, write down what the person has done and burn it after a year and never bring it up again. And people are like, I would that I could, So I think, my work as a trauma therapist really informs how I work with betrayal or any sort of trauma, grief, abuse, you name it. And you have to be patient if you're working with trauma. You have to be patient. And because trauma itself overwhelms and floods the body. And the healing of trauma is not flooding the body. Is doing enough work, having enough pressure there for growth, but not too much that the person gets flooded. And so I think I'm really patient with that. Yeah, I mean, I think I really avoid using any kind of language, and the research really points to this, of co-addiction or anything like that, because, Michelle Mays and all these other amazing people in the field and Barb Steffens and everybody have really said that does not work. I even read a study in grad school from Deb Laser that just said even combining couples therapy too quick for a lot of people doesn't work. Yeah. And so I think the hard part is for the addict or the person who has struggled with addiction, suffered with addiction, the world has been about them for a while, and their window of tolerance is pretty small. And we're asking them to be patient, which is really hard, but is also part of their healing. Basically, they're saying for a minute, it's going to be mostly about you in this dynamic. I'm going to go do my work, but I see it almost as like restoring the balance. We don't want it to be about the partner for the rest of their life. And if I see that in the long term, usually if the person starts to feel safer with me, they're not going to stay there. They're just not. They're not going to stay there. But I feel like it's usually been circling around the addicted person for a while. And then for a minute, it circles a little more around the partner. And then we try to get back to like a balance, which is it's going to be about both of us. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
it does. I wonder if you have observed, you talked about patience and compassion a lot. If there's a therapist who struggles to have patience, and let's say, you're working with a client who just shows up so angry every time. Do you feel like there have been people who have been kind of mislabeled as having personality disorders? I mean, just because it's taking longer than the therapist thinks that it ought to take?
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. Or just shamed, especially if the partner that has done the harming is more docile or has a flat affect or is really remorseful.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys know this from attachment dynamics. I'm not trying to get in the weeds with all this stuff, but the avoidant person can look really nice and chill.
Oh, yeah.
And the anxious person and
can look crazy.
Can look crazy.
Yeah.
And a gifted therapist is going to understand that that's the dynamic at play. And neither one is more right or wrong. This is just the dynamic that's at play. Is the more this person withdraws and has been avoidant and whatever, the more anxious and heightened this person's going to get.
And it's not that there aren't some cases in which one or both partners may have something diagnosable going on, but I wonder if the proportions of that, if we were really able to kind of have a magic, lens that we saw that through, if maybe those things get overused.
I'm sure they do. And thankfully, I'm in a community of colleagues that would not do that. And I think being more trauma informed in whatever work we do has really helped with some of this, helped us to be patient. And I've sat with people, it's taken years, right? Years, but I do trust the process. And the longer I do this, I trust the process. And each individual story is unique. So like a person coming in that has a previous history of betrayal and trauma, or maybe abandonment, it might take a lot longer for them, or someone who has less community support or whatever. And so you're working with the uniqueness of each person and their story.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of the community
Yeah.
aspect of it, that was another question that Stacey's going to ask in a minute, because ideally, at least this is our opinion, ideally someone who's been through a really tough season involving a betrayal, involving an addiction or a compulsive struggle, they need to be working with a therapist. If they're a Christian, they need to have people in their church family that they can trust with this. And they need to have a community of people who have similar experiences, that there's a shorthand. You don't have to always be telling your story to get somebody to understand it.
Yep.
And so I would think you would probably agree that for a lot of people, going to therapy alone is not everything that they need.
Right.
Going to a support meeting alone is not everything, because there's things that you can provide for your clients that we can't give in a support community, and vice versa.
Right.
And there's things that neither one of us can offer that the local church can. And so, again, talking about people who are Christians. But I know that when we were talking yesterday about our conversation today, Stacey, you'd had something that came to your mind that comes up quite a bit.
Yeah. So I am typically getting connected with someone who's just found out that her husband has done XYZ and, sex addiction, pornography, all the things. And so, one of my first questions is, have you found a therapist? Because I can't begin to help you deal with a lot of this stuff, because I'm not qualified. And then talking about the need for community and how it is so helpful just to be with other women who get that specific pain and understand and all of that. Well, a lot of times they come in and it's like, I don't know what I would do without this group from the first time they come. Others come one time, they'll come one time and they're like, I can't come back because I can't hear about all these other stories. Because maybe their husband, whatever he did, but maybe a lot of times it's quote unquote just pornography, which is extremely damaging and hurtful, but they haven't done maybe all these other things that other women.
And then when they hear about women whose husbands did, that gets them spinning. They just
start they're terrified, like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that. I mean, maybe he did, or maybe he will do that or something. And so they don't come back. I can't control that. It's not my responsibility. But I guess for me personally, I'm like, what's helpful to encourage them? I don't want to harm them.
Yeah. I mean, Stacey, I know you, and I'm sure you're already doing it. But for the people listening, I think this is coming back to the trusting the process thing. And it helps that I have a faith and a belief in, God bigger than myself. It makes me sad because I don't want people to be in pain, but I know that if it's not at the right time, it won't work.
That's right.
And so, I mean, I've had the gift, and this doesn't happen all the time, but of having clients leave, and we get to like something hard that they're going to have to work on, and they leave. and occasionally will reach back out, sometimes years later, and say, I was not able to receive that at the time, but I want you to know that now I am, and here's what has happened. And I'm sure that doesn't happen all the time, and that's okay. But it's enough for me to feel like I'm there to offer the invitation, but that's for someone else to accept. And who knows, honestly, maybe they're right. Maybe their body can't handle that right then, and they need something more. They need to deepen into something.
I mean, we talk about encouraging people to listen to their bodies and what their nervous system is telling them.
That's exactly right.
And when we feel like our safety is compromised and, our amygdala is firing off that cortisol and we're going into fight, flight, or freeze mode.
That's right.
It could be that our body's telling us this is a little bit too much right now.
Yes.
And so, it's easy for us because we've been in this for 15 years and we have seen its benefit to be able to say, oh, but just, push through, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
But maybe not, maybe pushing through, it wouldn't be fine for them.
Exactly.
And so
you can re-traumatize. I mean, not you, but like, trauma work is so much about consent. It's about saying, do you want to do this next thing? We could do this. Is that okay? Because so much has been forced on the body.
Yeah.
And I don't care if it's betrayal trauma or what kind of trauma it is.
Yes.
And so moving at the person's pace is so important. And it's this fine line between just enough challenge, love, conviction there, but the person still has the right to say, not for me at this time. And again, I've seen enough times that went okay to really just trust the process. And even for the people that maybe never came back to it, I trust that's not the end of the story.
Right.
They might have found something else.
They might have found something else.
Another sport.
That
group,
one meeting might have planted a seed or it might have watered a seed,
That's exactly
and somebody else is going to be on the journey with them when it grows into something that's really healthy and redeeming.
That's right.
I always tell people that I did not, there wasn't a group that I was encouraged to go to. There was one person I was encouraged to call. And I'm like, I'm not doing that.
Yes.
Because I'm not going to hang out with women whose husbands are sex addicts. That's not, but that's where I was. I mean, that's exactly the situation I was in. And so I'll tell people, I didn't want to call anybody, but when I got sick and tired of being sick and tired for me, then I finally called this person and it led to a group that I was a part of. And I hated it for about a year.
Yep.
I was mad every time I had to go. I have to do this. But I went because I knew I needed to.
Yep.
Nobody was forcing me to.
Yep.
And then I was mad every time when I came home because I felt better from the group, but I didn't want to feel better because of this group that I didn't want to go to.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I just share my experience.
That was fun to watch too.
Oh, I bet it was.
Well, it really, it kind of, we can laugh now, but just remembering even, because you talk about it a lot. And I remember I was going to a meeting long before you started. And I would come home just feeling so encouraged and great. And that would kind of tick you off.
Mad.
And thankfully God just gave me the protection from my own ignorance to not say, well, you could, blah, 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 blah. And just when you were mad, just to say, well, I'm sorry again, who knows how many times.
Yeah.
So just maybe for people who are listening, who were in that seat of, okay, my actions were the ones that kind of started this or catalyzed it. But man, I'm doing my work now, and I sure wish that my partner would. Like, that is a good desire. It's a good desire to want your partner to do healthy things so that he or she can get better. But it's not something that anybody can force, much less the person who is the main catalyst of the harm. You know?
That's right.
Well, who were we talking with? I don't know if it was a podcast, but I think it was when we did the first one with Bobby. The fact that I think y'all were talking about how you're coming to understand where this started. I mean, we're talking like in your childhood, probably.
Right.
And for us, we're just learning about this thing that's been going on your entire life. A lot of women know that something's been going on, but they usually, even if they have known about it their whole marriage, they don't know the degree or how deep it is. And so that's the other part I think is hard when you're talking about the addict showing empathy. I'm sure it feels amazing to have this secret out and you're not hiding anymore.
Yeah.
But then for us, it's like, give me a minute.
Yes.
Because
that's
I'm
really important.
Just figuring this out, and the trauma and all of it is just so hard. And then everybody, like you said, everybody's different. So we process it differently. And I just learned in the last few years about all the attachment stuff. I had no idea how anxiously attached. I had no idea. I don't think I could have gone there.
Yeah.
And God brought it whenever it was time.
It's so funny because, we'll wrap up in a minute here, but when we're recording this, Jill, we've been in a recovery process 15 years. We've been married 32 years, and things have been pretty crisis-free for the last 15 years. And yet just last year, there were some things that kind of came up that really punctuated the undone attachment work that now that in the absence of new trauma, okay, there's space for that, which is really cool.
I was just thinking that, like kind of to your previous question, I think that's what gives me patience when people are so dysregulated in the beginning and they're just, you don't have space for that self-awareness in survival mode.
No.
So really you just have to get safe. You have to get a little more supported and stabilized. And the self-awareness hopefully will come. At least for people who are in the process. And I just want to say this too, for people that are listening that, therapy is financially prohibitive for a lot of people. And I hate that. Most of us therapists have at least a couple of sliding scale slots that we try to offer for that reason. But if people can't in this season, do a group. There's free ones out there. There's ones through y'all, Awaken ones. Like I will tell people, if you are financially constrained, do a group. There is a lot you can get from a group. And maybe the therapy will come in time, but like having support and not being alone, I think is the most important thing. And you can do that for free.
That's so true. Well, and I was going to say too, the therapists that I know who have done their work are the amazing therapists. I think that's amazing that you have done your work.
Well, thank you.
It's got to make you a better therapist. I know it does.
Thank you. I don't, all the therapists I recommend in town, I can't speak to the other, but the therapists I recommend in town are all doing their own work. They're either in therapy themselves or they're in a group or they meet often with their colleagues and they have accountability because, oh my gosh, we don't graduate from that. We need it. I need it. I need my people so desperately. I need my friends. I need my community. I need my people. I have a group I attend every week and it's just a godsend for me. And I don't have to be in crisis to go. In fact, most of the time I'm not. It's just that scaffolding so that it's just like, hey, every time I walk in, I feel like what I'm saying is I need other people. And you have to humble yourself to walk in to just be like, I need other people. And I need them for my life to go well.
Thank you. Thanks for spending this time. And thank you for what you do. I have talked to enough people. I'll ask them sometimes, is your wife seeing somebody? And if they say, yeah, she's seeing Jill Gullahorn, I'm like, oh, yes. That's all.
That is the kindness.
We just keep hearing really comforting and good things about the support that they're getting.
Thank you, guys. I love y'all. I love what you do. But I mostly love y'all as people. It's been really a privilege to sit with you.